Hello everyone, I'm aReNGee and I'd like to welcome you all to the first episode of my newest series, Stock Talk. Stock Talk is a series that came about in sort of an interesting way based on my tier lists. There was a number of complaints that the decks that I was providing as references for the tier list were multiple patches out of date and simply just not that useful for people who wanted to see what exactly was being successful right now. I've taken this to heart and I've taken it upon myself in order to develop out stock lists for each deck that I put on the tier list. They may not be quite tuned enough to be the best decks right now, but they'll certainly give you an idea of what people are being successful with right now. Now, Stock Talk comes about as I thought it would be interesting to look behind the scenes and see how I actually develop out these decks. I'm starting this first episode with a deck that was all over the place last patch and is still tier 1 this patch, though some people may not believe it. Rakano Warcry. For this particular stock list, I built out the list myself from scratch without referring to anything, based on my past experiences. I played Rakano for about 6 weeks when I was a new player, starting from that one guy's original Rakano guide, which was very helpful and guided me along the way. But I built what you see in front of you here. Now, a notable absence from this list that would be nearly inexcusable last patch is Rakano Artisan. Rakano Artisan was changed this patch, this most recent patch, version 1.11, to lose 1 point of health. That's it. Now, why is that enough to move it out of these lists when it was there before? Well, the current metagame is not exactly friendly to 1 health units. They are taken out by Vera's Favors, they are taken out by Lightning Storms, and they do not match up very well against the various 1/1 tokens that are being played right now. Essentially, Rakano Artisan is played entirely for its Battlecry effect, and the unit body itself would be taken out by essentially splash damage from your opponent's deck, making it not a particularly useful 2-drop. And the 2-drop slot in this particular deck is very crowded, playing 12 2-drop units and the full 18 2-drops altogether. Now, the 3 that I've chosen are Champion of Glory, Crownwatch, Paladin, and Rakano Outlaw. Champion of Glory and Rakano Outlaw have Quick Draw, which makes them good at pushing through the various unit battles that we have right now, and Crownwatch Paladin has Aegis, which makes it good against the various control decks that want to sweep away all your guys with Lightning Storm. For my 1-drops, I chose to use Oni Ronin and Pyroknight, and for my 3-drops, I went with Silverwing Familiar to win races, and Valkyrie Enforcer as a utility 3-drop. I also included Deep Forge Plate after some playtesting because I found that I was having trouble breaking through, again, those 1/1 stalls. And even sometimes I got stopped in the air by a random 4/4 flyer and couldn't break through with a Valkyrie Enforcer or what have you. I found that the Overwhelm and Endurance was quite useful, mostly the Overwhelm. So I played this to reasonable success, maybe 60-65% win rate. And then I decided to take a look at what the top of the top master players were playing. Now, we're lucky enough that 2 of the top 5 master players right now are Rakano fans. They've been playing it for, since the reset in this particular metagame, so their lists are very tuned and they're very successful. And I was able to get a lot out of those. So let's take a look at Aesirblade's Rakano list first. His list is a fair bit different from mine. The first card that jumped out at me was a card that wasn't played, didn't see much widespread play the patch ago, which is Sparring Partner. Now, Sparring Partner comes down as a 0/3, and it doesn't actually do anything until you invest a weapon in it. But once you do, it gets +3 attack, and it hits very hard very quickly. This wasn't played in a lot of Rakano lists before because they were more, they went a little bigger. Deep Forge Plate was such a powerful card when it costs 4 power that they could afford to wait around and put it on a 3-drop. Now, these were the days of Silverwing's Familiar's glory days, when you just suited them up and went to town and there was very little people could do without getting 2 for 1, 3 for 1, even more for 1. Because a 5/5 flying lifesteal Aegis Overwhelm Endurance flyer was not something that could be taken out without substantial card investment. However, Silverwing Familiar does not even make the cut in this particular list, which was certainly a surprise to me. However, once we get deeper into it, you'll find that it makes a lot of sense. He's also cut the Pyroknights down to 2, meaning that he's going with a 10/1 drop package compared to my 8/1 drop package. However, he's playing 2 more Elder's Feathers than I was, which was interesting to me because I didn't actually have a ton of success with Elder's Feather. Giving my random 2/2s +1/+1 did not react particularly well when they got silenced by the various Combre things or Sandstorm Titan came down, and it didn't push them out of torch range. However, Elder's Feather looks a lot better in this list with Sparring Partner, because playing a 4/4 flying with on turn 2 is quite difficult to deal with for a lot of decks. It's out of torch range, it's out of... you can vanquish it, but you can vanquish it or annihilate it, but that's about the only way to trade even on power, which is a lot of the power of the Rakano decks, I think, right now, is that they can play this evasive threat on turn 2 and get in for a ton of damage that you need a specific answer to play, either that vanquish or the annihilate on curve. Sparring Partner also has the additional power of avoiding a lot of the commonly played removal right now. All of your various X1s, for the same reasons that Rakano Artisan gets pushed out, Sparring Partner comes in because it has that 3 health and it dodges the Lightning Storms and the Vera's Favors. He's also only playing 3 Champions of Glory, although his 2 drops are the same as mine, which I think is, again, a response to the various Combre silences. Champion of Glory is one of the worst cards you can have silenced in Rakano, and also just because it's quite difficult to get that 4 influence all the time. So Champion of Glory is a 3/1, dies to all the aforementioned things, and Champion of Glory is a 1/3, doesn't actually attack very well. Another card that he's playing that I'm not is Gilded Glaive, which, now when I think about it now, probably should be included in my initial list. It gives him the early game flexibility to play it on a Sparring Partner on turn 2 and get in there as a 5/5, and it also gives him a lot of late game insurance, especially flood insurance, because this scales very well with Power Surge, so it scales well with each power that you play. He's only playing 2 Katanas, but he shares my 2 Vanquish, 4 Shogun Scepter sort of a card. He's playing the full 4 Valkyrie Enforcers, which makes sense as a 3-drop unit, as he's decided to not play the Silver Wings. I have not spoken to him about this, but I imagine his decision is that the Silverwing Familiars were not high enough impact on their own and were blanked by a lot of the flyers out there, and he'd rather put his weapons on some of his early drops and get in there than have to save them for the flyers. This is a racing deck, first and foremost, and it doesn't actually include any lifesteal to make that better, so you need to go face faster than your opponent can go face. At the very top of his curve, he does not reach all the way up for the Deep Forge Plate, but rather goes for Hammer of Might. Hammer of Might is a card that sees medium play. Some players like it, some players don't. It's a 4-drop weapon that gives +3/+3 and has summon. Unit gains Warcry 3 this turn. So it's not a permanent Warcry effect, but the turn that you play it, you're usually going to be playing it on something that can attack, and it will give your next unit or weapon in your deck at least +3/+3. So another Hammer of Might, which makes it a pretty good late game card because it gives you the bonus the turn that you play it, and the next card that you play it also gets the same bonus. So it becomes a lot stronger, and it makes your top decks better, which is what Rakano's all about, having great top decks. It's interesting to me that in this list that he hedges for late game with those Vanquishes to take as removal, the Hammer of Mights, 2 Pyroknights, and the Gilded Glaives, but also focuses on having a really offensive-oriented game plan with 10 1-drops, with 10 1-drop units and 11 2-drop units, plus 19 different attachments to get in there, although only 15 actually go on units. So he's playing a very aggressive list that does have 10 about 10 cards that scale well into the later game and can get him out of power flood situations. Despite playing Sparring Partner, a card that doesn't do anything on itself, he's definitely got the attachments to enable it. So this guy was number 1, and with this deck, it's not surprising why. This is quite a tuned list, and it looks pretty good for the current metagame, as it's about as fast as you can ask for without also opening itself up unnecessarily to Lightning Storm. It has the Sparring Partners that survive, the Crownwatch Paladins, the Champions, the Enforcers, and plenty of equipment to suit him up. So let's take a look at a different player's list, current number 2 Unearthly's Rakano list. A big shock to me, especially since these guys did not work together, is how similar this list looks to Aesirblades. In fact, they're only 8 cards different. The 1-drop package is exactly the same, the Gilded Glaives, the Elder's Feathers. The 2-drop package of units is exactly the same down to the 3 Champions of Glory. He's playing the same 3 and 4s with the Shogun, Scepter, Enforcer, and Hammer of Might. However, the differences in his list are pretty interesting. He's playing 4 copies of Warhelm, a card that most players think is a kind of a joke card. At least that was my impression back in the day. It is a weapon that gives +1/+0, charge, and Warcry. So it doesn't give any defensive possibilities whatever, and it only gives 1 attack boost. But it does give charge, and it does give Warcry, which is great for stacking. One thing that this combines very well with is later game Sparring Partners can get in there as 4/3s immediately, and you can suit up an evasive flyer, get it in there, and it works very well with, well, power boosting in general works very well with the quick draw units in the deck. However, it's certainly a more high risk, high reward option than any other card would be, as it's a relatively low impact weapon on its own and really needs a unit and a good spot in order to make it be maximum value. He's playing 0 Vanquishes, but instead playing the full 4 Ornate Katanas to boost up his units. So he's looking to be as aggressive as possible, even more aggressive than the Aesirblade list. However, he's not playing any sort of Icaria, so his removal is limited strictly to 4 Torch, which you're probably looking to go face here. Aside from that, the only other difference between his and Aesirblade's list is that he's playing 2 Emerald Monuments as additional late game insurance, just as 5 mana 3/3 weapons to throw on to his guys and hope to get in there for the last points. This is probably about as aggressive as you can tune a Rakano list without putting in some Frontier Jitos. It's got the Warhelms, it's got all the Katanas, and it's just looking to smash face. However, I personally prefer Aesirblade's take of a more measured Rakano deck, as this deck has no defensive measures whatsoever. It's got no removal. It doesn't have the same... It tries to have some late game, but it doesn't do it as well without the removal options, as you're gonna run into points where their units are better than yours and you can't attack through them. However, he's also been very successful with this list, and it's only a few cards different from the Aesirblade list. So I'm going to trust these guys in their choices, but I remain somewhat skeptical about the Warhelm. It is my personal belief that going so far as to Warhelm your guys is going a little bit too far off the Rakano end, if you will. So since these 2 decks between these 2 great players is only 6 cards different, it was relatively easy for me to build a stock Rakano list based on their lists. I basically split the difference between their decks. I like the 4 Ornate Katanas, but I also like the 2 Vanquishes. So I put those in there, and I added 2 Sword of Icarias to sort of round out the curve. Sometimes you draw this as a big 7/6 weapon, and it totally crushes something, and sometimes it's just an additional torch. Overall, I mostly scrapped the ideas from my list that were different from these 2 players, just because they have been tuning their decks, and these This is about as close as I think you can get to a stock Rakano list for what you have here. You have at least 6 flex slots. I would call the additional Katanas, the Vanquishes, and the sort of Icarias flex slots that you can do whatever you want with. But for the moment, I would trust their judgment, go with the sparring partner versions, play the feathers, keep the glaives, and I think 3 Champion of Glory is probably a good number, since you do have the problem with getting the influence requirements for those. As for whether they're correct not to reach up to Deep Forge Plate, I think with only 25 power, that's probably optimal. You don't want to draw power in this deck. You'd much rather draw action. And there's always the problem that sometimes you draw 4 power and a much Warcry Deep Forge Plate and can never play it. So I, again, trust their judgment on this one. But this is definitely the power base that you want to be playing. 7 Fire Sigils, 6 Justice Sigils, and the 12 duels. As for whether or not you want to play a monument, I would play the Emerald over the Granite Monument, and I personally would not play the Emerald Monument. I'd rather have all of my power come into play undepleted, because you'd rather not draw 5 sigils and then a monument if you can at all help it. So, this has been the first edition of Stock Talk. I will have the stock Rakano list in the comments for you, and it will be included in the next tier list. Please let me know, please comment on the video, let me know what you thought, if there's anything that I missed going through these lists, and let me know what deck you'd like me to take a look at next. I do take requests, and I'd be happy to let you guys take a look. Right at the moment, I'm thinking of looking at Party Hour and seeing what kind of variances we have in those lists, but I haven't seen too much variation between the top players based on the initial list. The deck is pretty much already in a stock state. So, until next time, wish you all the best.